As I was saying before, somebody heard me saying that California was the best place that I've been through as a tourist. So I thought somebody posted this right away, so I will give it a look. And I'm aware of this is what I was saying as well. Like I'm aware that there is a lot of issues, right? But it's just I mean, the climate is nice. The people are more or less nice. They told me that there is a lot of homeless people, but again, I went on May 2024. So I don't know whether or not the thing has gotten worse or it was worse before. I mean, I heard somebody saying that they cleaned their road because Xi Jinping was coming to the state. It might be that I got it, like I went there when it was like the cleanest it has ever been in the last 30 years. I don't know, but for me it was nice. But let's see all the problems that it
California's
has.
sunbaked beaches and Mediterranean climate have made it seem like a dream come true to anyone who saw it. For centuries, people travelled from across the entire world to the state, hoping to build a new life. With Hollywood pictures romanticizing life in California, its beautiful nature, and all the money circulating there makes it seem like a paradise on earth. But
It
today,
does.
everything seems to be changing in California.
California is paradise. You have to work really, really hard to ruin paradise. But we did it once, and they're doing it again in California. They did it in the Garden of Eden, and now they're doing it in California.
And unfortunately, what used to be paradise on earth has now become a living nightmare for most who live there. California's largest cities have been decimated by economic chaos, an explosion in crime, and a rapidly growing homeless population. So if you want to pay $2,500 to $3,000 a month in rent for a tiny one bed,
All right, this is something I heard from a person that I actually talked to when I was there. It is true that the renting like the renting prices in LA seem to be like, and also in San Francisco because I was in both, but I knew from this person from LA they are like, if I had to pay that much to stay in California and having all those issues that they're saying and not a free healthcare and so on, I mean that is just an unlivable. I don't know how much is the uh, GDP per capita there. I mean, or the medium income is. I have no idea, but let's say it's 100,000. You will basically 70% anyway of your paycheck goes to pay a one bedroom or
all
whatever.
while
And I
surrounded
want
by
to live
crime
in
and
a three
poverty,
bedroom,
then
not
Los
a one
Angeles or San
bedroom for
Francisco
sure.
could be the right city for you. It's a tragedy how far California has fallen. Its cities were always a little rough around the edges.
All right.
Any large city in the US is, but 10 years ago a controversial change to state laws pushed California off the edge, and that was called Proposition 47, and it came into effect in late 2014, and since then, the entire state seems to have been plunged down into this dystopian vision. Now the changes it made were relatively simple. Lots of crimes that used to be felonies were recategorized into misdemeanors. In the US, a felony is a charge for a serious crime which often
heard
leads to jail
about this
time, while a
proposition,
misdemeanor is less
actually.
serious, more like a parking ticket. The most important crimes that got downgraded were theft, shoplifting, and fraud. If the value of whatever was stolen or defrauded was under $950, then the most you could expect to see was a fine. It also decriminalized the use and possession of hard drugs. If you got caught with any amount worth under the $950 cutoff, then it was barely worth it for the police to even take notice. It might
Honestly, who the fuck thought that this was a good idea? Honestly, who thought that this was a good idea? I mean, this is like, let's under $1,000 is fine. We have monkeys in positions of power in the West lately because, like, they make decisions that make no fucking sense.
It might seem obvious now how bad of an idea this was, but there was a vision behind it. The lawmakers who pushed it through said it was designed to ease the pressure of police by changing the focus of government away from punishment and towards rehabilitation and education. They thought they could tackle the root causes of the state's problems, which sounds great on paper. With fewer people to arrest and imprison, money could then be diverted away from the police and towards better things like schools or care for the homeless. Of course, when the law actually came into effect, this wasn't even close to what ended up happening. One of the most obvious and destructive effects has been the rise of serial shoplifting in California. It didn't take long for criminals to realize they could pretty much take what they wanted from shops. As long as each hit didn't add up to the $950 felony amount, they could get off scot-free, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Now, these were still technically crimes, but they just weren't really punished anymore. The police had been made powerless to intervene through underfunding and more hoops to jump through before a conviction. It meant that shoplifters could only get in trouble if a security guard caught and detained them, often waiting hours for the police to show up. When they did, the guard would then have to go to court on his own time and provide evidence that proved the crime. Then and only then would the shoplifter get punished, but because it was now a misdemeanor, it usually just resulted in a fine of around $1,000. It's hard to say how many of these fines themselves were even enforced. The homeless people who committed the offences are hard to track down, and then you'd have to somehow get the money from them, which is pretty hard considering they'd almost certainly spent it already. This is what caused those infamous videos of people shamelessly looting stores in broad daylight, while powerless customers and shopkeepers watched helplessly.
I mean, normally I would say something, but there is nothing to say. Like, what do you think it would happen? Again, like, you're legalizing theft, basically.
Made it so that California is now the top state in the country for retail theft, even despite the fact that most shoplifting goes unreported. It's mainly because there really isn't any point in even making the phone call anymore. Small businesses have been hit the hardest by this. They've tried to come up with ways to stop it, of course. Most shops in places like San Francisco or San Diego now keep most of their products behind protective glass, but even treating all customers like criminals hasn't really worked. 75% of small businesses lose between $500 to $2,500 in products every single month because of this epidemic of theft. There have been casualties across the state, but one example comes from Clement Street, a road in San Francisco.
To be honest, at this point, what does stop you to go in? For example, I need a pack of cigarettes, or I need like a shampoo or whatever. Just go in and just take it and go out. They will probably never stop you. Police will never show up, so who cares?
That used to support tons of shops and small businesses. Unfortunately, they've been dealing with multiple break-ins and thefts as well as shoplifting, which are pushing them further towards bankruptcy. In an interview with local TV news, one of the business owners told reporters that, quote, "We just want to do our business peacefully and we want to feel safe when we're doing it, because running the business is already hard and we don't need something like this to add on top of it." But before we continue, I want to tell you about our video sponsor. Have you heard that the flavored air category is a more organized smash and grab heists? Gangs of criminals will often target entire high streets in one night, breaking into the shops one by one and taking whatever valuables they can find. It can only add to the massive pressure being felt by small businesses across California. Lots of them have been pushed to their breaking points or forced to close.
At that point, just don't open business in California anymore. I would never open a business where, you know, if you steal $1,000, you're fine. I would never do that.
Down. Cafe International, which has survived for 35 years in San Francisco, was forced to temporarily close in 2021 to deal with the damages. In a social media post, the owner blamed it on the massive rise in shoplifting and petty crime, as well as multiple break-ins. And thankfully it did manage to survive despite the continued assaults, but other businesses haven't been so lucky. Large retail chains like Target or Nordstrom have had to close a bunch of their stores in LA and San Francisco because of this. It's this atmosphere of fear and apathy from the government that led California down this sorry road. The majority of the crimes have come from a small group of repeat offenders, but police have been prevented from actually cracking down on them. The proposition is now widely condemned by California's people, the majority supporting harsher punishments because of this spree of crime. The question still remains, where did all of the money go? If Proposition 47 was meant to free up resources to solve these problems, what did that end up looking like? Part of the plan was to put more money into California's homeless problem, which was only getting worse in 2014 when it passed. Looking at the state of things now though, it clearly hasn't worked. Over a quarter of the homeless population in the entire US live in California. There's around 180,000 of them, and that's only counting the people we know about. Between 2007 and 2022, the number of homeless went up by over 30%. In just the year after that, it went up by another 5.7%. But why is it getting so much worse in California compared to other states? Homelessness and substance abuse go hand in hand. You can't understand one without factoring.
Well, but also, like, again, if you have to work 6 jobs to afford like a regular 1 bedroom, I mean, of course you live in the streets. Most of them most likely don't even consume drugs. It's just that the cost of living has become so outrageous. I remember that in California I paid for this is the thing that I really remember. Outside of fast food, certain fast foods like In-N-Outs, all the rest, you would need a minimum of $15 to $20 to eat anything outside, right? And even if I was going shopping to, normal Target or whatever, I remember that a minimum of $10 is required to eat good. I'm not saying that you need like boiled tuna, right? Or cooked tuna, like a can of tuna. No, I'm talking about eating good. And to eat good there, you unfortunately need a lot of money. So that summed up with paying rent for $2,500. I would never go to California to live. It's a beautiful place to see, to be a tourist. And that's why I said at the beginning, like, I didn't notice too much. But imagine paying those kind of prices every day, plus a home on your head and in your paycheck. You will never be able to live a normal life where you also save something to maybe do some trips, like, for example, going in Europe from the US. It will never happen.
In the other.
Too
On the
much
one hand,
money.
using hard drugs like amphetamines or opiates often can very easily lead people towards homelessness.
But that's a
It's the
consequence.
final stop on a tragic
The
journey, the
opiates
very
are
bottom of the pit.
consequences.
A lot of the time though, it works the other way. People become homeless because of other reasons.
Yeah.
Then they start using as a
Exactly.
coping mechanism. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter how it starts though. Frequent use and addiction keeps people on the streets. It traps them in a cycle of using up everything they have to make sure they can get the next dose. By pretty much decriminalizing both drug possession and theft, while drug legalization is a good thing towards liberty, and it generally makes a lot of sense, Proposition 47 almost makes it so that open drug use on the streets is now normalized.
Wir haben dir keine Gebühren zu verheimlichen. Hol dir das 100% transparent.
For people to get trapped in the spiral. First, there's shoplifting and petty theft, which we've already talked about. Now that it isn't really punished, addicts always have a way to make enough money to get their next hit. With drug possession effectively decriminalized as well, there really isn't any need to hide it anymore. The cops don't have the time, the resources, or the permission to deal with it, so people buy, sell, and use drugs in public. Far from trying to stop this, Proposition 47 has actively encouraged it. A large part of the money that is freed up went towards harm reduction for addicts, and they're generally well-intentioned programs. Giving addicts access to free healthcare can only be a benefit, but they also offer other services, like giving people access to clean needles, and even in San Francisco.
Probably overflood the system, because imagine 180,000 people, let's say half of it, 60,000 people or 90,000 people will be using drugs, most likely of some sort. Imagine those right into the healthcare system like overnight.
Francisco, apparently alcohol? Now, if they're using clean and sterile equipment, then addicts are less likely to get bloodborne diseases, which is a good thing, and it might have helped if that were the only dangers of drug use. But the kinds of opiates that we see today on the streets are so potent and harmful, it doesn't really matter. They'll often just kill people far quicker than the disease ever could. But it's also meant that any addict has everything they need to keep using, all completely for free. They have everything they need, and the police aren't putting them into mandatory rehab programs either like they used to.
would they?
And the results have been tragic to say the least. In the years after Proposition 47 was introduced, overdose deaths exploded in San Francisco, rising from around 100 a year to over 500. There are other factors at play here, like the increased potency of the drugs themselves, but it's undeniable that Proposition 47 hasn't played a major role. In New York, for example, overdose deaths have increased, but only by around half the rate. We just haven't seen the same spike in other cities across the country. The last nail in the coffin is the ratio of homeless people that aren't living in some kind of shelter. Around 70% of California's homeless population live outside of shelters, far more than any other parts of the country. First, there's the problem of who they let in. Lots of the money that went towards shelters really aren't suitable for most homeless people. They often have strict rules banning drug use and pets, which already blocks a massive part of the homeless population from using them. California's near-perfect climate actually makes things worse in this case as well. In New York, around only 5% of the homeless population actually sleeps on the streets. For a large part of the year, it's just too cold to survive outside with just a sleeping bag or a tent. But that's not true in places like Los Angeles. Then there's the fact that addicts have most of their needs provided for anyway, and the police really don't interfere. So why not set up your tent on the main high street? The result of all of this has been tent cities and open-air drug markets that we see on the streets of California today. And they've simply made these cities far worse places to live in.
In their estimation, 85 to 90% of the police calls for service deal with the homeless in some fashion. Most of these crimes are committed by mentally ill or drugged up homeless people rather than some group of organized criminals, which is something you see a lot in LAPD jurisdiction. Even though there are plenty of facilities aimed at helping these people, the harsh reality is that most transients are either suffering from severe mental illness or drug use. They then went on to say that it's not an easy fix, and ultimately...
Severe mental illness is coming from drug abuse. It's not like all of a sudden 4 million people start to be mentally ill, you know?
It needs to be handled on a much bigger level if we're ever going to see any progress.
Take the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It used to be one of the biggest tourism landmarks in the state. Now, most people avoid it. It's known as being a dangerous...
True. This is something I did the Walk of Fame, and I remember that especially outside of the extremely central area, all the fringes and quite a big part of it, actually, you saw homeless people left and right, and they seemed to be aggressive. Like, I managed to do a long walk, so basically all of it. I did almost the whole of it. And at a certain point, I had to go, I think, to Griffith Observatory from there, and I think we had to go for Franklin Street, I think it was called, one parallel of the Hollywood Boulevard. And then, like, at some point, it got so bad that I decided to go back, not go under the underpass. I remember there was an underpass because it was full of homeless and human shit on the street. That I remember.
Especially according to locals who already know what's going on there.
I'm living somewhere where I don't feel safe taking my mom for a walk. I don't feel safe sending my nieces to the store if they came to visit me.
The homeless encampments nearby make it a hostile environment. Even the smell is apparently awful.
Look at this.
The crime, though, is the worst part. Assaults, stabbings, and murders are much more common now. Each bad experience that someone has chips away at California's reputation. Now, people do still come to see Hollywood today, but it's hard to say how long they'll keep coming with families if it continues to stay this way. Even just recently, Graham Stephan released a video about Santa Monica, showing how many shops are closing down and how crime is through the roof there.
Which means theoretically you could walk into a store, steal up to $950 of the goods, and then walk out without really any fear of consequence. Especially when most employees are told not to get involved. By the time the police do show up, the suspect is long gone, and a lot of the cases honestly just aren't heavily prosecuted.
This is supposed to be one of the nicest places in Los Angeles. Now, local governments across California have tried to deal with this, moving the tent cities around or trying to uproot them entirely. But many of these initiatives have failed, like in San Francisco. Now, San Diego is often pointed to as a better example, but it's not really all it seems. Recently, they passed laws allowing the police to actually deal with the tent cities and move homeless people off the main roads, which has gotten them away from the schools and the main streets, but it hasn't solved the problem at all. They're still there, just in different places like under bridges or next to the highways. It's definitely not a long-term solution. In fact, it mirrors the early stages of what could become a much larger problem. Brazil and its largest cities are home to absolutely massive slums called favelas. They also began as the equivalent of tent cities, large amounts of people living packed together in impoverished homes. As they grew into permanent shanties,
this is the final result, huh? So if they continue like this, then the final thing will be that they will have slums all over it.
Towns, the crime and the poverty only got worse. The environment creates gang culture and chaos. Today, pictures of the favelas contrasted with the upper class mansions on the other side of the hill are known around the world. And favelas are seen as one of the most dangerous places in the world. This is potentially a future that's unfolding right now in California, as you've got million-dollar apartments completely surrounded by desperate people without a penny to their name. And the results are clear to see. Entire communities are now crumbling under the pressure. Issues like homelessness can seem so complicated that you can't get your head around them. But one pretty simple reason it's getting worse in California is how expensive the alternative has become. Each time the rent goes up, which has been happening every year since 2011, it puts more families out on the streets. LA and California's other large cities are now some of the most expensive in the world, especially when it comes to housing. If you're living in some parts of California earning the minimum wage, you'd need to work the equivalent of 3 full-time jobs just to scrape by. It means that a lot of people working essential jobs which society couldn't function without are now being forced out of the system. It's completely unsustainable. But why has it gotten so bad? Well, a massive part of the problem is that there simply isn't enough homes being built. California is the most regulated state in the USA. Their code of regulations, the book containing all the administrative rules, is over 21 million words long. It means their regulations are around 3 times stricter compared to the average state. And so building anything here is way more expensive than it should be. The fees, the permits, and the fines if you make any mistakes can lead to building a home or a block of flats cost 18% more than
I mean, that at the end of the day is the real root of the problem. Like,
and it can take years
houses should not cost $3,000 to live in.
waiting and therefore years of legal fees to get through all of the red tape. With all of these extra costs, it makes it far riskier for construction companies to actually build anything in the state. You can easily go bankrupt waiting for your permits to come through. They could go pretty much anywhere else in the country and make more money in a much shorter time. Proposition 47 was meant to help with this in a roundabout way. The money they took from the police was meant to build more shelters and housing to go towards solving the homeless problem. And it would go some of the way towards relieving the state's massive housing shortage. But a state audit in April showed how ineffective they've really been. It was revealed that despite throwing billions of dollars at the problem, the state of California rarely kept track of where the money was actually going or if it was actually helping. It's a statewide problem. They spent $24 billion.
And this, my friends, is why also in Europe, socialism has to be complemented by something that has nothing to do with socialism and has to do with capitalism. And at times, you have to regulate the socialist agenda on the first place. Because you see, whenever you have something state regulated and not liberalized, the money that is spent often, and I'm telling this again, coming from countries where there is a lot of welfare state, but a lot of those monies, and you're talking about billions of people, are just wasted and forgotten because nobody's paying for those and nobody gets any backlash for it.
$1 billion in programs to solve homelessness between 2018 and 2023. In the same period, the homeless population swelled by 30,000 more people. And it's really bad on just an individual city level as well. San Diego spent over $2 billion on homelessness programs between 2015 and 2022. It's really confusing how they could spend so much money while the problem still gets worse. But it makes a lot more sense when you look at what they've actually been buying with that taxpayer money. Recently, Santa Monica officials gave the go-ahead for building a set of basic apartments to house homeless people in. You might think that it's a step in the right direction. It's better than them living on the streets at least. But the twist is that each of these units will cost over $1 million to make. An insane amount for basic homes, especially considering the city already owned the land itself. Contracts like these are probably the only reason any construction company stays in California anymore. It all stinks of corruption. Billions of dollars have disappeared, the state doesn't even write down where it all went, and they've been putting scams like this for years.
See, it's not going to fix it. They're bankrupt. This state is bankrupt because they're incompetent. They're not going to become competent if you give them more money.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
exactly.
they've managed the money that they got very poorly. They already have high taxes. There's a 13.5% state income tax here in California. And the place is still fucked up.
In 2022, the city of LA spent over $50 million on buying a 50-story luxury apartment building to move homeless people into. It already seems like an awful decision to begin with, but over 2 years later and they still haven't filled even a single one of those apartments. There's no way the best solution for homelessness was to buy luxury apartments at crazy prices and then not even use them. They haven't even bothered to hide how corrupt it all seems. This all amounts to millions and millions of taxpayer money that went out of the city's budget and into someone else's pockets. It should hopefully be clear now that
honestly, this is the fault of the people who elect those people. It's not the fault of the politician itself. Of course, it's the fault of them, but in democracy, and especially when you have choices, you make the choice, right? Some may argue that it gives you the idea of the choice, even though not giving you a choice, meaning that they tell you that you actually have a choice, but the choice is always between the two parties. So basically, you don't have a choice. You're just going 50-50 and choosing the ones that is the least worst. But it's Also, I have to say, California has a very specific agenda that it follows all the times. And all the times is going worse, and it's going worse, and it's going worse. Because California, as many places in Western Europe, or very rich places in the US or Canada, people like to pretend they're good. And unfortunately, pretending that you're good leads you to making the wrong decisions, because these are not logical decisions. It's just a decision that you have because you want to pretend that you're good, that you're, well, progressive in the case of California. We are so progressive that even if you do a misdemeanor, then it's fine. If theft is not a misdemeanor, you're not progressive. You're regressing with the word progressing.
That California's idiotic laws are only the tip of the iceberg. They enable the corruption that's keeping California cities incredibly expensive, while also full of homelessness and crime. It's why the recently announced plans to scrap the Proposition 47 are a little too late. It's taken years and years for people's voices to finally get heard, and now the damage has already been done.
It is.
Even now, though, with so much overwhelming evidence of its failures, Gavin Newsom and other Democratic lawmakers are dead set on keeping Proposition 47 in place. But eventually people couldn't keep ignoring what's right in front of them, and now there's bipartisan support to get rid of it. There's enough support to get rid of it that reversing the law is now going to be on the ballot in the November election. At least that's if Newsom and his cronies can't put a stop to it. First, Newsom tried to get it removed completely, but he had to back down when even his fellow Democrats wouldn't let him. So he's moved on to a different option, delaying and complicating it. Despite his outward support for Proposition 47, he's now been trying to get his own watered-down version of the reform onto the ballot instead. His version wouldn't actually deal with the problems Proposition 47 has created. For example, it would only make selling other drugs laced with fentanyl a major crime, rather than actually dealing with fentanyl itself. Other than that, he's also introduced new laws to combat specific cases of serial theft. Now, it might put an end to the videos of people shoving shop merchandise into garbage bags, but it wouldn't really do much else. Suspiciously close to the upcoming general election, he's also suddenly been making public appearances clearing up homeless camps and passing laws to finally let police move them off the...
Again, this guy behaves like this because he knows that people will vote for him. This is the thing, and people will fall for it, even though this is the same guy I remember that I was eating at the restaurant while telling all the other people to stay at home because there was COVID. I mean, it's the fault of the people.
The common factor is that these are all moves
like
designed to help with appearances while keeping the same moldy status quo. It isn't surprising that people have been leaving California in droves for years now. High prices, rents, crime levels, and taxes have taken their toll on the people, and a huge exodus has begun. Over 2021 and 2022, nearly 750,000 people left the state alone, and that's after you offset the people that moved in, with people instead moving to states like Texas or Florida, which offer far lower taxes and much safer cities. It hasn't just been people and families either, but small businesses are getting sick of the massive costs.
As a former resident of California, I have to question whether or not these are actually strict enough to make a difference, because let's be real, for this to really go into effect, a shoplifter would first have to get caught, likely on camera with proof. Their items would then need to be counted, most likely across counties, and then the state would have to keep proper records of everything just to be able to prosecute.
I mean, why would you pay double the rent and way more taxes just to open a shop next to a homeless encampment? The larger companies they used to call California home are the same. Tesla and Chevron have been moving their factories to Texas. Tons of tech companies like Meta and PayPal have abandoned San Francisco.
Businesses leaving California doubled from 2012 to 2019, but over 30 years, the state has experienced a net loss of 17,000 businesses. The study says it's high taxes, heavy regulation, and generally unfriendly business environments.
And it's really a terrible shame that this place of amazing natural beauty, rich culture has fallen so far. But today it's clear that the only people welcome in California either have tens of millions of dollars or no money at all. And it's the regular people that are suffering the consequences of this.